Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about the basics of list. So let's talk about the motivation for list. So let's say we have this problem that we're asking for the user what day of the week it is, and we want to verify what the user typed in, right? To make sure that it is Monday, Tuesday, etc., etc. Okay, so given what we've known, one way we could do it is because there's 7 days in a week, then we can use 6 ORs with 7 clauses to make sure the date that the user put in is one of the values of Monday, Tuesday, all the way through Sunday. Okay, so that's a way, but it's a really big giant OR, and we can think about, okay, what if we're asking the number of months, and maybe something that even have more unique values. So the problem is that there are really days. The day of the week is one of those things that have multiple related values. It's a collection of things, right? So yeah, as we said, the days in a week is 7. The days in a year is the month in a year is 12, and then if we're talking about the number of students in this class, it's probably close to 40. What about the number of students in a school? That's thousands, if not tens of thousands, right? And then things can go even bigger from there, right? You think about the number of web pages in the world, it numbers in the billions. So a lot of the real world, the data, is really a collection of things, and so far we haven't learned anything that can represent a collection of things, and that's what we're trying to remedy right now. So in Python, we have a number of tools to deal with collection of things. One of the most commonly used type, it is a built-in type to Python. It is called a list. Now I want to emphasize list is just one of them. There are many others. But anyway, so let's look at the syntax to create a list. And so I'm going to create a list of numbers. Now I'm going to say create a variable name numbers. Usually the name of a variable for a list or a collection of things basically should be plural. And then I am going to start with a square bracket that tells us that tells the Python interpreter that we're going to create a list. And then we can put some number of items or elements inside the square brackets. So for now, I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. So each of these things in the list, it's individual items or individual elements, and each of them are separated by a comma, as you can see. And obviously, it ends with the closing matching square bracket. So we can print it out just to see what it is, and it is a list. Again, the square bracket signifies that it is a list. And that's what this slide is trying to say. Another thing I want to mention is that what if this list is shorter, 3 numbers. What if the list is longer? So what if we want to create the days of the week, which if we put all 7 of them on one line, it could exceed the limit per line recommended by PEP8. So in that case, we can do a style like this, more vertical. So the typical style is put the open square bracket on the same line as the variable itself, and then 1 line per individual items or element, and that line ends at a comma. And obviously the list should be enclosed by a closing matching square bracket. Now for the last line, this comma is optional, but I usually put it myself because then it makes the last line consistent with the rest of the lines, and it makes it really easy if we want to add new items at the end of the list. So what can you put inside a list? Well, basically anything. So we've already seen examples of putting in numbers and putting in strings as elements or items for the list. And as a matter of fact, for Python, you can put different types of things in the same list. So for example, in this numbers, I can actually put a string in addition to just integer, and Python is not going to complained about that. And this is kind of, it's not very typical for other languages, it's the strongly typed languages. And as a matter of fact, for Python, it might not be a very typical use case either. But Python does allow you to do that. And as a matter of fact, you can even put another list and another data structure inside a list itself. But let's not worry about that right now. One of the very common things you want to know about a list is the number of items in the list. And for that, you can use the length built-in function. And I can just say length numbers. And let me also do the length of for date here. And length of days of the week. So yeah, numbers has 3 items in the list, and days of the week, that is 7. Another very common thing we do with regard to a list is to get to an individual items in the list. Now there are a couple of different ways to do it. I will show you one way right now, and that is by using what's called an index. Index, basically, when we use the right index, it will retrieve an item at that index for us. Now, it's very, very important to remember that in programming, in most programming languages, the index of the first item is 0. It's not index 1. And index 1 would actually give us the second item. And then index 2 would give us the third item, so on and so forth. Okay? And now that's index. And to use the index to get to a particular item, we give it the list first, and then we use the square bracket, and we put the index in there. So this should hopefully give us Sunday. That's the first item in our days of the week list. And let's say if we want to get to, let's say, Wednesday, that's after Tuesday, which is index 2, so that's index 3, and that's Wednesday, and you can try a few other numbers. But again, the most important thing to remember is the first item is at index 0. Okay, so here is a little thought exercise for you. We just said that index of the first item is always at 0. So what about the index of the last item? Now, we know for days of the week, the Saturday, the last day of the week, well, if we start on Sunday, is the index will be 6, right? Because there are 7 items in this list. And for, maybe a list of numbers with 3 numbers, then the index of the last number will be index 2. So we know that. But that means, the last item of lists of different lengths are going to be at different, there will be a different index. But can we find a formula? Can we express the index of the last item as a function of the length of the list? So maybe pause the video and give it some thought. Okay, so hopefully you've thought about that and you actually came up with this little formula for it. The last item of a list is always at the index of the length of the list minus 1. And you look at this example, again, the length of this list is 7. The last item is at index 6. So 6 is 7 minus 1, or the length minus 1. Right? Same thing for here, that a list of 3 numbers, the length is 3, 3 minus 1, and that would give us index 2 for the last item in the list. And let me quickly demonstrate this. So the last item, length of days of the week minus 1. So that should give us Saturday. And indeed it does. And if we look at this, I changed some of the numbers here so that it's less confusing. Numbers, length of numbers minus 1. That would be, again, should be give us 33. 33. That's the last item in this list. And we can do, if we do, say, instead of -1, we can do -2, and that should give us Friday, right? So now, as a matter of fact, it's actually quite common to try to access items in a list, start counting from the end of the list rather than from the beginning. And as you see, we can always use, say, length of that list minus some number, right? Now, we do this so often enough that Python's the language, the committee decide that instead of always saying length of the list, we can just get rid of it and use what's called a negative index. So if we use -1, that is the same as length of the list -1. So let me run that. That should give us the Saturday. Okay, and the same thing here. If I get rid of the length, and that's would give me exactly the same thing as before. Okay, so one way to think about this is then, the last item is actually at index -1. The second to the last item is at index -2, and so on and so forth. And the negative index is in addition to the positive index that we start counting from the beginning. So this last item is at both index -1 as well as 6, and this would be -2 as well as 5. So that's rather convenient depending on what we want to do. And this is, as far as I know, is a feature, it's a Python specific feature. It certainly does not work in Java or C++, at least the last time I checked. Now, so far we've used nice indexes that are legal. Well, what if we put in an index that's invalid, let's say 100? Well, it's invalid because we know the positive indexes goes from 0 to 6. 100 certainly doesn't point to anything that's inside the list. So what happens when we run it? Well, here's what happens. We get a scary looking red message that tells us, hey, on this line of code, right? This line of code, there is an index error. And the message itself, it's actually quite helpful. It tells us exactly that the list index is out of range. So I think I said this before, is when we see messages like that, don't panic, read it very carefully, and quite often we can actually make sense of the error message. Okay, so hopefully you've done the exercise. Now, the last thing I want to say for the list is that, especially for those of you who are familiar with other languages such as C++ or Java, that list is rather like an array in those languages. However, list in Python is actually a lot more powerful than an array. For example, as we already saw, it allows for heterogeneous types in a list. And also, Python list, it can grow and shrink very easily, unlike array, which can come in very, very handy. There are other differences, and list is just a lot more powerful than array in general. And there is no built-in array in Python, but there is a standard package called array, but its use is very limited because it only supports certain types, and its whole goal is to have something in Python for efficiency. So it is faster than list, but again, the use case is very limited.